It's a pleasure meeting you again in the second day of the first Kuwait PPP conference. I am truly humbled and honored to be speaking to you today. And I first would like to take this chance to thank the organizers, first for organizing this great and timely conference, and second for their kind invitation to me to speak to you today. My remarks today speak to the very nature of PPP projects. We have listened to the distinguished speakers yesterday and today as well, who all emphasized on the importance of understanding the nature of PPP projects, which requires establishing a true partnership between the public and private parties. And in this sense, a distinction must be made between the traditional public procurement methods and EPC contracts and partnership models through PPP projects. This is interpreted in several fundamental principles that are cornerstones of PPP projects. When we speak of a true partnership, that should not, it should mean a proper allocation of risk to start with. And allocation of risk between public and private partners. A common misconception about PPPs is that PPP projects are a way of financing public infrastructure projects. It's a misconception that PPPs are a way to get free infrastructure. The truth is, in most cases, the government still pays for the projects, either directly or indirectly. It is true that there are some revenue generating PPP projects, but that's not always the case. And even in these revenue generating PPP projects, when the government gets paid by investors from the private sector, the government still provides a long-term concession, and that itself has value. So it can be argued that even in this case, the government provide and contribute significantly to the project. And this is why it's always called a partnership. So what is transferred here in this case really is not, what we don't get free infrastructure, but the truth is that what is transferred here is the risk of securing financing for the project. For example, if the government wishes to build a power plant in Kuwait, and most of the region states actually that do not allow private parties to sell power to end users directly, the government will have to pay to the private party what is called capacity payments or availability payments, like Engineer Jassim explained in the previous presentation. And these capacity payments are paid in installments over the term of the project, as well as, in this specific case, the government has to undertake to buy all the produced power because the project company cannot sell directly to end users. So there would be an offtake agreement to buy all the product by the project company. What happened in this example, which is the most common commercial structure for power plants in the region, as well as a lot of other PPP projects other than power plants, is that the government shifted the initial risk of financing the project, as well as the construction risk in this case, to the private party. Whereas the government here assumed the risk of demand for the produced power. So eventually, under this model, the government will pay for all construction and operational costs of the project to the private party once the project is operational. In other words, the public party or the government has just deferred paying for the project. However, if the risk allocation is not done properly and adequately, the government may end up paying even more money, as improper allocation of risk results in increasing the costs of the project. And by saying paying more, I mean more than it should be paying in similar projects. If the risk allocation is done properly and adequately. By doing this, the government achieves less value for money, which is another corner principle of PPP projects. But before we speak about value for money and explain it, let me explain first why improper risk allocation results in increasing costs of the project. When the government shifts the risk of financing the project to the private party, it does so because the private investors are more capable of dealing with such a risk. That is to say, private investors can secure financing from local and international financial institutions, relying on project finance principles. These project finance principles require the project agreements to be bankable, so that the financing institutions can find enough guarantees in the project itself, including its assets and revenues, and rely on that to provide the finance. If the government decides to impose certain contractual clauses that do not reflect the proper risk allocation, then it affects the bankability of the project and its documents. So, for example, if termination clauses do not guarantee the private party's right to be fairly and timely compensated upon termination to the extent that the financing parties will also guarantee being repaid upon termination. This will impede the financing parties' abilities to rely on such clauses to guarantee repayment of the loan amounts upon termination. The direct consequences for this would be that the financing parties will require the private investors or the sponsors to assume this risk. And how is this done? It's done by providing additional corporate guarantees in different forms. And these corporate guarantees necessarily, of course, increases the cost of the project. But not only this additional cost on the investor that will eventually be inflicted on the project, but it also adds unnecessary and undesirable levels of complicity to the transaction and to the documentation of the project, and makes it less attractive to both investors and financials. As an engineer Jasmine said in the previous projects, it's already not easy to attract foreign investments. There is a large competition between the different states to attract such investments, and the easier, or let's say the more flexible these clauses are, and the more bankable the projects are and the documentation is, the more attractive to the investors these projects become. So an important guiding principle to achieve this value for money, going back to the value for money principle, this means that by making a payment, value for money means that by making a payment for the project, the government should attain most value for each dinar it pays. The question is, how do we measure such a value? In context of PPP projects, value should be measured in terms of the most advantageous combination of cost, quality, and sustainability to meet the government requirements. Of course, there are some economic tools to measure value for money, such as the so-called 4 E's: the economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. But as you're aware, also these are rather wide and broad notions that can hardly be accurately measured. But as it's said, also, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So the same applies to measuring value here. The best value for money remains contested depending on who and how we look at it. So what can be seen as best value for money from the government perspective may not be seen as value for money from citizens' view, for example, or even by other governmental entities. So what can be seen good value for money for a project by a line ministry may not be seen good value for money by supervising authority or entity. So in terms of money, this would mean that the government may choose a more expensive option to carry out a project if such an option provides more quality, efficiency, and sustainability. This is where the terms like sustainable and resilient infrastructure have emerged. So the term value for money and the principle of value for money is now not limited to the notion of only maximizing the economic benefits of the project, but also expanded to talk about more greener projects and sustainable projects. And this is usually linked also to SDGs. We can talk about climate change goals that can be achieved through these resilient infrastructure projects implemented through PPP projects. So the concept of value for money has developed to a broader understanding that value for money should be measured in terms of value for people. And based on this understanding, a government may choose to implement a green, environment-friendly infrastructure project over a less costly, non-environment friendly project. This manner, PPPs can be used as a tool to bridge the financing gap while delivering sustainable and resilient infrastructure. This, of course, would require planning. Indeed, planning cannot be overemphasized in PPP projects, and such projects cannot be rushed by any means. It is also a misconception, a great misconception, that tendering a PPP project can be completed in a few months. In fact, this can only be done if the project is planned ahead and assuming that there are no other legal or bureaucratic impediments. It is crucial for the success of any PPP project to undertake a thorough and detailed feasibility study ahead, taking into account the available options for carrying out such a project and deciding on the best option in light of the broader definition of value for money or value for people, as we discussed. So once it is determined that PPP is the most suitable model for tendering such a project, then a proper risk allocation should be implemented to maximize the benefits of this model. From a legal perspective, Kuwaiti legal perspective, Kuwait law defines PPP projects as projects to implement an activity through which the state targets to provide public service of economic, social, or service importance, or to improve an existing public service, or to develop, reduce the costs, or increase inefficiency of such service. So under Kuwaiti law as well, PPPs are very flexible and can be used for both economic infrastructure as well as what is called social infrastructure. So this means that Kuwaiti law has taken into consideration the potential social benefits of enhancing the efficiency of public services, but also permits implementing the PPP model to social and environmental projects that may not necessarily be the cheapest options. One of the main and unique features also of Kuwaiti PPP law number 116 of 2014 is that it allocates 50% of public project companies shares to Kuwaiti citizens, and most of us would recall that last year the shares were 50% shares of Azor North power plant project companies were successfully transferred to Kuwaiti citizens for the first time in relation to a PPP project. So this said, I'm being conscious of time now, the government should also consider the broad understanding of PPP projects before taking a decision to stop or cancel a tender PPP project, because the costs of cancellation, in addition to other, social and environmental impacts of this cancelled project, can way overweight the costs or the difference in cost of that project. To conclude, the government should follow a good investment planning process that prioritizes projects based on development needs, socio-economic return, and targeted to ensure inclusivity. Government support through adopting the most adequate risk allocation is very crucial for the success of PPP projects, and proper understanding of the physical implications of PPPs and their adequate integration in the overall public investment strategy may also prevent misconceptions about PPPs, specifically that PPPs are free infrastructure projects. This is an extremely interesting topic, and there's much to be said about it, but I don't want to cross over my time. So I will leave it here, hoping to meet you in the near future, next PPP conferences in Kuwait, to speak about hopefully more success stories in Kuwait and the region. Thank you very much.